Welcome back. In the previous lecture, we met Abuzar Nasir Ramadi, and he talked about the potential of AI in agriculture. Now it's time to learn more about environmental toxins contaminating drinking water. Please warmly welcome Lutz Ahrens.
We are surrounded by man-made chemicals, and many of these chemicals can have an effect on the water quality on global scale. And my research interest is what can we do to identify hazardous chemicals and how we can develop treatment techniques to remove these chemicals from the environment. My name is Lutz Ahrens. I'm professor in environmental organic chemistry. A lot of my research is focusing on PFAS, so-called pair and polyfluoroalkyl substances. PFAS are persistent organic pollutants. They are used in many different consumer articles, such as textile, paper, and personal care products. And from their production, usage, and waste facilities, PFAS can enter the aquatic environment and can be harmful for the ecosystem and human health. In my research, I want to develop new innovative treatment techniques for removal of PFAS and other contaminants from water. And the treatment strategy is that first we separate, then concentrate, and then destruct these chemicals. For example, first we use membrane for separation of the waste stream. Then we use foam fractionation for concentrating the waste stream, and then, for example, using electrochemical oxidation for destruction of hazardous chemicals. So in the end, we are closing the loop and we can reuse the water. The goal of my research is to identify hazardous chemicals at an early stage. Right now, we have just discovered the tip of the iceberg.
Welcome, Lutz.
Yeah, thank you.
You were one of the first researchers looking into the subject of PFAS. How did it all start for
Yeah, indeed. And it was very early on, 2006, my PhD supervisor, he was on a small conference in Hamburg and about PFASs. No one knew about these substances. And he said, hey, let's write an application on this. So I wrote an application and got funding for a PhD project.
Okay.
So it was a very exciting time.
And what was driving the research from an international point of view? What was driving the research forward after that?
In the beginning, there were just very few small research groups doing research on these substances. So in the beginning, it was mainly scandals which were driving the research, discovery of PFAS in drinking water or humans.
Okay. Well, talking about scandals, you've been involved as an expert of a legal case where the Swedish armed forces recently were found guilty of polluting the water in Uppsala with PFAS. The PFAS came from fire extinguishing agents that were used at the Ärna Air Base. And now the armed forces have to pay Uppsala Vatten 27 million Swedish kronor as compensation. What do you think about this situation?
Yeah, it's a really hot topic. So the decision was just last week. So, and it's a very, very positive that the court decided in favor for Uppsala Vatten, that the military has to compensate. And overall, I think it was a success for science, actually. We worked together since 2012, more than 10 years together, try to trace the source, identify the source, try to develop new treatment techniques. So overall, a successful story for science.
And what do you think this verdict means for future cases where water has been contaminated by environmental toxins? Sorry.
Yeah, it has, I think, a big influence because now we know the polluter has to pay. And the science is really, really important. It has a big, big role and a high responsibility to create new knowledge and benefit society.
How motivating is that for you?
Very motivating, yes, for sure.
Well, please tell us more. Please take the stage to deliver your lecture.
Thank you very much.
I have the pleasure of introducing Lutz Ahrens, Professor of Environmental Organic Chemistry, talking about organic micropollutants in our drinking water. Should we be concerned?
Thank you very much for the introduction. So now we are talking about PFASs, pair and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And this is a large group of chemicals. More than 10,000 chemicals are within this group. And they're used in many different consumer articles. For example, frying pans, microwave popcorn bags. They're used in firefighting foam. They're used in personal care products. They're used in clothing, waterproof material, or electronics. So we come in contact with these chemicals in our everyday life. And here's shown a map of Europe with PFAS contaminated sites. So in red we see known sites for PFAS contamination, and in blue we see possible sites. So here in this study, more than 17,000 sites have been discovered in Europe, and every day new sites are discovered. And PFAS are circulating in the environment. So from the industry where PFAS are produced, they're used in many, many different consumer products, but also firefighting foam. And in the end of the life, they can end up on landfills, on our wastewater. And from all these different sources, they can end up in our environment, in the aquatic environment, in the terrestrial environment. And from all these sources, they can go also in our food chain. They can use in our food products, in our drinking water. And we humans can be exposed by these chemicals from consumer articles or by food and drinking water. And in the following, I will focus a bit more about the drinking water pathway. Where does our drinking water comes from? So around 50% of our drinking water in Sweden comes from surface water, 25% from groundwater, and 25% of artificial infiltration. So drinking water is one of our main foodstuff. So we drink around 2 to 2.5 liters every day of drinking water. So the protection of drinking water is very, very important. And this is also one of the sustainability development goals from the United Nations, that we have a good health and well-being and clean water and sanitation. Now talking about PFAS in drinking water. And here we see a map from Uppsala. We see the black dots on the map are drinking water wells. We see in blue is the groundwater flow. So the groundwater flow in Uppsala comes from the north and going to the south. And in yellow we see the two main drinking water plants in Uppsala, one in the south, one in the north. And here we see Ärna. Ärna is located in the north part of Uppsala. And here we see the PFAS contamination plume in groundwater, which going from north to south. And when we look at the conventional drinking water plant, they're not designed to remove these emerging pollutants, such as PFAS. They're designed to remove color, organic matter, bacteria, but they're not designed to remove organic micropollutants. So in a typical drinking water treatment plant, the ingoing PFAS concentration is the outgoing concentration. And this is a big problem if you have a contamination like in Uppsala. So if we look at the raw water concentration of PFAS in groundwater, here is highlighted the drinking water plant in the south. The south drinking water plant is directly in the plume, in the PFAS plume, which is coming from Ärna. So the drinking water wells are collecting PFAS contaminated groundwater. And the levels are around 150 nanogram per liter for the sum of PFASs. And the levels of 4 PFASs, which are especially toxic, is around 80, and the rest are other PFASs. And we will get new drinking water guidelines. They will be established in 2026. And there are 2 guideline values. One is for the sum of 21 PFASs, which will be 100 nanogram per liter. So right now in the raw water, we are around 50% over this first drinking water guideline. However, Sweden will also implement a second guideline value of 4 nanogram per liter for the 4 most toxic PFASs, which is only 4 nanogram per liter. It's just a drop in the Olympic swimming pool. And here we are 20 times over the drinking water guideline value, which will come 2026. So the big question is, what do we do? And here, again, we see the PFAS concentration in the raw water, around 150 nanogram per liter for the sum of PFASs. And here we see the drinking water plant, the current situation, what we have since 2012, when the PFAS contamination have been discovered. So in the beginning, we have a softening, removing hardness. Then we have a sand filter to remove particles. In 2012, they implemented this barrier, this chemical barrier called granulated activated carbon. It's a material which has a very, very large surface area, so it's very, very efficient in removing organic contaminants such as PFASs. The problem is that this barrier or this filter gets saturated over time. So you have to replace the filter. So, which means, so you have to put the material on a truck, you transport it to Germany, there it's regenerated by combustion, put it on a truck, and then going back to the drinking water plant. This costs a lot of money. And then in the end, you have disinfection for removal of bacteria. So after the current situation, what we have right now, we have around 25 nanogram per liter in our drinking water here in Uppsala. So the levels are well below 100 nanogram per liter, which is very, very good. But they're on the edge. They're around 4 or 5 nanogram per liter for the 4 most toxic PFASs. So we have to improve our drinking water treatment process. So in the future drinking water process for PFASs, we work together with Uppsala Vatten to improve the current situation. So again, the same, we have 150 nanogram per liter in our groundwater, raw water. We have softening, we have sand filters. And what we are developing right now, we have a large pilot scale installed at Uppsala Vatten. We're using membranes, both reverse osmosis or nanofiltration. Membranes are kind of filters. You use a high pressure to push the water through these filters. These filters are very, very small. It's just nanoscale. So all the water molecules and small ions like salts are passing the filter, and larger molecules like PFAS are rejected. They don't pass the filter. The problem is you create a waste stream. All these molecules which are not passing the filters, you create a waste stream. So we're developing a treatment train to take care of the waste. So we are using foam fractionation to concentrate the waste stream and electrochemical oxidation to destruct PFAS. And in the end, we have a disinfection. With these new treatment train, which we are developing right now, so preliminary results showing that we have levels of 1 to 2 nanogram per liter. So it's a very, very efficient treatment process for removal of PFAS. So we are well below even with the new drinking water guidelines. So as a message for everyone is that each treatment technique has advantages and disadvantages. So combination of different treatment techniques is the best solution. So we want to separate the waste stream, we want to concentrate, and in the end, we want to destroy like PFAS. However, this is not the end of the story. So PFAS concentration in human blood in Uppsala have increased since from 1995 to 2010, before the discovery. We see a strong increase. And we have discovered this PFAS contamination too late, unfortunately. And PFAS are not the only chemicals. Here we show a map of chemicals registered in the CAS registration. And until now, we see more than 220 million chemicals are registered. So there are a huge number of different man-made chemicals right now registered. So these PFAS, these known chemicals, is just the tip of the iceberg. And there are many, many other chemicals which we have not discovered yet. And in my future research, I want to develop methods to identify these toxic, hazardous chemicals. And hereby we are combining cell-based toxicity tests in collaboration with other research groups at SLU and analytical chemical method in my lab. And by combination of these two methods, we can identify toxic drivers. It's so-called effect directive analysis. So my future vision of my research is to develop an early warning system for hazardous chemicals. What is an early warning system? A good example is a tsunami. For a tsunami, we have a warning system at the coast. So before the tsunami arrives, the population at the coast get warned and can go into safe place. For chemicals, we have no early warning system right now. We were not warned that these PFAS has contaminated our drinking water over decades. So we need to establish some kind of warning system for hazardous chemicals. How can it look like? In the beginning, we need a very, very good data monitoring, data collection, or data mining. And then we need to process the data. We can use modeling to look at their physical chemical properties, exposure potential. And then we have to identify an early warning signal. So of chemicals which can be hazardous to the environment or humans. And this can support agencies and government to make decisions. And with these decisions, for example, to make new drinking water guideline values as a response of this early warning system, and see if these new drinking water guideline values are effective. In the end, I would like to thank you, everyone, all my collaborators, and thank you very much for listening.
And of course, you are welcome with your questions. I suppose you will have questions on this subject. Well, do we have? Well, I'll start with one. PFAS have been widely used for a reason. I mean, they are oil and water repellent, they are heat resistant, and they have several other advantages from a product perspective. Do you think it will be possible to replace PFAS by new substances with similar functionalities but with reduced environmental and health impacts?
Yes, I think it's possible. And right now in the EU, there's a new regulation in the parliament under discussion to ban the whole class of PFASs. So to ban the essential use of PFASs. For example, at the first stage, to replace products where we have already replacement compounds, like for textile, for example, or Teflon, we have already replacement compounds. So in short time, these PFASs can be replaced in these products. And for other products where we don't have yet replacement compounds, that the industry gets a bit more time to replace, to produce PFAS-free products.
And in what applications do you think it will be most difficult to replace them?
I think there are very few, very specific applications where it takes probably more time, but I would say 99% or 95% of the products we have already replacement compounds. For example, frying pans have been used since hundreds of years. Outdoor clothes has been used for thousands of years. So we have replacement compounds. More difficult might be very specific application in spacecraft or medical use, where it's also the safety is important, that we don't have replacement compounds yet. But this is a very small margin of usage, and yeah.
We have two questions over there. So, and I also have one email question here. So please.
Yeah, thank you for a very nice lecture. I was wondering, you said that it's constantly rising, the amount of PFAS we measure in the blood. Do you see sort of, or foresee when it's leveling out in the near future, will it be sort of constant increasing, or will we find it even a decrease sometime?
Yeah. No, that's actually a good story. I mean, we see since 2012 the levels in human blood, for example, in Uppsala, are increasing. But new studies showing actually since then the levels are going down. So the implementation of these new drinking water methods by Uppsala Vatten in Uppsala really helped. And the levels since 2012 are significant, going down right now. So it is possible really to reduce the PFAS levels in human blood.
Yes, please.
Thank you for the talk. One is usually very thirsty after holding a presentation like that, but you haven't drank any water yet. Is that deliberate, or in other questions, do you drink water in Uppsala?
So I would say that the water is safe at the moment, and the levels are very, very low, but they're not acute toxic, they are more these long-term effects. And it's still, we don't know 100% how toxic these class of chemicals are. But Uppsala Vatten is really doing everything to lower the levels. So the levels are very, very low, what we have right now in our drinking water. and they will reduce them even more in the future. So I think our drinking water, is safe.
I'm glad we have so many questions. I will read one question from the digital audience. What would be most financially and practical? 1, seek a new, cleaner water source. 2, treat the contaminated site. Or 3, invest in better treatment at the water treatment plant.
I think we need everything. It depends on the case. So when this was discovered, 2012, they had to shut down some of the drinking water wells and had to look for new drinking water sources. Because most contaminated wells, they don't use anymore. In Uppsala, I mean, we need drinking water. In Uppsala, everyone needs, and we drink our drinking water. So they could not shut down the drinking water plant. So they had to implement a drinking water technique.
Yeah.
And right now we need to improve our drinking water technique. So all three are needed, actually.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Oh, hello. Thanks very much for your lecture. I'm wondering, because you mentioned now you're talking about the drinking water, but the drinking water also spreads in nature, and we consume food and other from nature. How much does that impact our intake of these PFAS? And also, just a second question quickly, is because you were also mentioning all these enormous, almost like a tsunami of new chemicals coming towards us, and the legal process is so much slower. How can we deal with that? Can we start? Would it be possible to prevent them from being used before they are considered safe, rather than the opposite? Or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, to your first question, the main problem of PFAS is that they're extremely persistent. So once they're released in the environment, they're staying in the environment and circulating in the environment. They're also called forever chemicals. And it's a big, big problem, actually. And in the end, often they end up in the ocean, for example, where they're diluted, but they still stay in the environment and circulating in the environment. So this problem we will have for hundreds of years. It will not go away. And about the second problem, yes, we are producing more and more different chemicals. And I think with this early warning system, we have to regulate chemicals at an early stage. And we have a registration system in the EU, and we should evaluate at a very early stage what are the physical-chemical properties. If we would have done it for PFAS, we would have seen with models that they're very, very persistent chemicals. They are potential bioaccumulative, they're potential toxic. So these PFAS should have never come to the market, actually, which if we would have done it on an early stage. But right now we don't have this early warning system implemented.
I have another question here. What options are there to avoid further leakage of PFAS from an airport area? Where would you start if you were contacted to help with the remediation of the Ärna site?
Yeah, we would be very happy if the military would contact us, please help. They haven't done it yet, but there are solutions. There are solutions to treat this problem. First of all, for the hotspot, you can dig it out or you can mix it with activated carbon. And you can implement chemical barriers that the PFAS contamination plume is not spreading further from the site. You can use pump and treat. So there are many, many full-scale treatment techniques already available. Yes, I would love to do it.
And why do you think they haven't contacted you yet?
I think it's more a political issue, probably. The military want to be more on their own. And I think they should be more open that in other countries. The military is open and they look for support, and the science can really help here to solve this problem.
Are there any more questions? Not right now? Or yes, please?
I have another question just regarding PFAS has been, as you said, since 2006, or the awareness of it. In 20 years, do you see what chemical we will talk about then? Is there any new sort of this chemicals of wonder that is sort of too good to be true as a substance?
Yeah, there are a lot of chemical classes which are overlooked. I think right now more and more in regulation gets mobile substances. These are very persistent mobile substances, smaller molecules. They're very water soluble. They're circulating in the environment. They're very difficult to remove from the environment. And more attention also in regulatory perspective is going into these mobile substances, mobile persistent substances. And yeah, there's a lot more we need to discover there.
And I was thinking about in your lecture you told us about the vision of your new research to develop an early warning system for pollutants. And you showed us a picture. Could you give us a more concrete picture of what it could look like? Who could do could you tell us something more about what you see?
So yeah, in the future vision, I think that's one method. You need different types, a toolbox of different methods for supporting early warning system. One is about what I talked about as an example, when you regulate chemicals at an early stage, that you should not, you should ban chemicals at an early stage. But also we need better monitoring tools to identify hazardous chemicals at an early stage by combining toxicity method and chemical analytical method to find the toxic drivers. So it's a kind of a toolbox we are developing to identify these. We have to focus on the toxic chemicals. We cannot focus on 100 million chemicals. We focus on the chemicals which are a threat for the environment and humans.
I was just thinking about the PCB problem. What did we do right? I mean, they have been removed from the environment. Can you say something about that? What could we learn from that?
I think
story?
It's important to globally ban these kind of chemicals, and there's now an effort also for PFAS to globally ban them. Right now, only few of these class of chemicals are banned. Like banning a whole class of chemicals, I think this is the solution there. These really persistent toxic chemicals, it's a global effort. Researchers and governments have to work together and ban these chemicals to avoid their human exposure.
And you see this movement in EU, for example?
I see this movement, but there's also a very strong industry against it. So it will be a big challenge, I think, for these PFAS. It's a big market. So this will be a big challenge to ban the whole classes of PFAS.
We have another question.
Yeah, it was a little bit on what you just touched upon, because I wanted to ask you about the political motivation right now. Because if you go today and you try to buy a jacket that doesn't have Gore-Tex, for example, it's very difficult to find one, and you really have to make an effort. But you say that we can already replace them. How come this is not done already?
Yeah, the industry is very strong, and I think one thing could help to label products which contain PFAS. Put a big label on it, very visible big label. This contains toxic PFAS chemicals. This would help a lot, so the consumer can decide, to buy it or not to buy it. I think this would help already a lot to influence the people, the consumers, to buy these products. Nowadays, not even I, as a PFAS expert, know which product contains PFAS. It's very difficult, even for me, to identify these products. So the government, they need to help us to regulate these chemicals.
And we have a final question from the first row, Helena, here.
Thank you so much, Lutz. You've been working in Sweden and also Europe. Have you been looking at the global south? How the contamination looks like? It seems as if you mentioned that there's a lot of industry interest. We know that, for instance, medicals are actually banned in Europe or in the Western world, or exported to the global south. How does it look in the global south when it comes to PFAS, for instance?
Yeah, it's a complex question, and we are all connected. We have a global market right now, and PFAS are very mobile, and they're mainly produced in industrial countries like US, Europe, China. But unfortunately, these PFAS can be distributed globally by the atmosphere and by the ocean. So we see high concentration even in the Arctic and Antarctic or on the southern hemisphere. These PFAS are global. We talk about global transport. So we see these PFAS everywhere in the world. We see them in polar bears. We see them in all animals. So to regulate these, we have to do it on an international scale. And one also problem, if we only regulate them in Europe, then all the industry will go somewhere else. They will go in the southern countries, or they go to Asia, and the products we still import. So this is not a solution also. So we need a global solution.
I hope you will get a lot of funding for your research.
Thank you very much.
And with that, thank you very much, Lutz Ahrens.
Thank you.
And now we will have a coffee break until 10:40, and after the break we will meet Johan Dicksved. So welcome back.